There's a certain kind of person you've probably noticed in your life. They don't always talk the loudest, they're not necessarily the most talented in the room, and they're definitely not doing anything that looks like hustle from the outside. But somehow, things work out for them. Opportunities find them. People trust them quickly. And when they walk into a space, something shifts. It doesn't look like magic, but it doesn't look like effort either. And if you've ever watched someone like that and thought, what is it about them? The answer isn't what most people assume. It's not confidence, it's not charm, it's not even intelligence. It's a pattern, a very specific pattern that runs quietly underneath everything they do. The first thing you notice, if you look closely enough, is that these people are almost never in a rush emotionally. Not in the way that looks calm on the outside but is screaming on the inside. Genuinely not in a rush. When most people get an opportunity, there's this immediate internal spike, a kind of anxiety dressed up as excitement. They respond too fast, agree too quickly, say yes before they've even thought about whether they want to. People who attract success have a different internal rhythm. They pause, not dramatically, not as a tactic, they just don't feel the urgency that other people feel. And that comes from something deeper than discipline. It comes from a quiet belief that things don't have to be grabbed, that if something is right, it will still be right in 20 minutes, in 3 days, after they've thought about it. That internal pace changes everything. It changes how they make decisions, it changes how they're perceived, and it changes what they attract. When you're not radiating desperation, people read you differently. Without even knowing why, they assume you have options. And that assumption, it often creates the very options it assumed. Here's where it gets interesting. Most people have a very strong internal pull toward being understood, toward making sure people know their intentions, their reasons, their side of things. When someone misreads them, there's this discomfort, almost like a threat, that pushes them to explain themselves. People who attract success have, at some point, made peace with not always being understood. That's not indifference, it's not coldness, it's something closer to a quiet self-trust that doesn't need constant external confirmation to stay intact. And what that does is remarkable. It means they don't over-explain, they don't perform, they don't shape themselves around whatever the room seems to want. And because of that, what you see is actually them, not a version of them designed to be liked. Authenticity, in psychological terms, is deeply attractive to people, not because it's morally superior, but because it's rare. The nervous system recognizes realness. People feel safe around someone who isn't trying to manage their perception. So the pattern looks like confidence, but underneath, it's actually something more like security, a kind of internal ground that doesn't shift depending on who's in the room. But here's what most conversations about success miss entirely. It's not about what these people do, it's about what they've stopped doing. Somewhere along the way, they stopped running the quiet background programs that most people run constantly. The "am I enough" loop, the "what do they think of me" calculation, the "if I just work harder, prove more, say the right things" spiral. Not because they solved those questions, but because they stopped needing them answered before they could move. And that is the actual pattern. Success in almost every domain requires a certain quality of attention, the ability to be fully present with what's in front of you, to think clearly, to respond instead of react. But when someone's mind is occupied with self-monitoring, with tracking how they're coming across, managing other people's impressions, calculating their own worth in real time, there's very little cognitive space left for anything else. People who attract success aren't necessarily smarter, they're just less occupied with themselves, and that frees up something that looks, from the outside, like effortless capability. There's one more pattern, and it's subtle. Most people are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty, with not knowing how something will turn out, with being in the middle of something that hasn't resolved yet. That discomfort doesn't just feel bad, it drives behavior. It makes people close loops too early, Take the first option because waiting feels unbearable. Overplan as a way of creating the illusion of control. Avoid starting because starting means entering the unknown. People who attract success have a different relationship with the in-between. They can sit in the middle of something unresolved without it destabilizing them. They can not know and still move. That's not a personality trait they were born with. It's something that develops when someone has experienced enough uncertainty to learn at a gut level that it eventually resolves. That not knowing now doesn't mean not knowing forever. That being in the middle isn't the same as being lost. And that tolerance for ambiguity, it allows them to take risks others won't take, to start things others wait too long to start, to stay in rooms, literal and metaphorical, where most people excuse themselves out of discomfort. So when you look at someone who seems to move through life with an unusual kind of ease, who attracts opportunities, who carries themselves differently, who people instinctively trust, what you're really seeing is a collection of internal patterns, a rhythm that doesn't chase, a security that doesn't need constant confirmation, and attention that isn't fragmented by self-monitoring, and a tolerance for uncertainty that keeps them moving when others stop. None of it looks dramatic. That's what makes it easy to miss. But once you see it, once you recognize the pattern underneath the behavior, you start to see it everywhere. In the people around you, in the moments where you have it yourself, and in the moments where something quieter is running the show. It was never random. It was always a pattern. And understanding the pattern is how you begin to recognize it in yourself. If something in this felt familiar, if it explained something you've been noticing but couldn't quite name, there's more to explore here. The deeper you go into understanding how identity shapes behavior, the more the world around you starts to make sense.